Get in on the action and make your bet with Sports Interaction. Summer is heating up with baseball. Can the Jays make a run at the division?
Oh, no.
Yeah. Hey, but you can bet before the game, whichever way you think. Live and in play at all your favorite teams and hot dog contests. Woo! Woo! SportsInteraction.com/STPN or download the app to get started. It's 19 plus. And what do you have to do, Steve?
Please play responsibly.
Welcome to Nailing the Apex, everyone. I'm Tim Hauraney. Please head on over to Spotify. Give us a 5-star rating and a follow. Same goes with Apple Podcasts as well. Write a review as it really helps us grow the show. You can also watch us on YouTube. You can follow me on social media at Tim Hauraney. Joining me today to go over the Italian Grand Prix is Mark Dailey from the Scuderia F1 Pod. Mark, how's it going, man? I mean, like, this was a great race.
It was. Before we get into it, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Okay, on your where does Monza rate in your, say, top 5 circuits? Because I asked this, I asked Hammy on our podcast last week. I said Monza for me is top 3.
Yeah, so I've raced on this track before in the past, and it is in, I would say it's probably like top 3 or 4.
Mm-hmm.
Only, not because of like difficulty level, like the braking zones were difficult. Corner exits, some corner exits were a little difficult. But other than that, it was more along the lines of the history. Like you could really feel the history when you were there racing.
Sure.
Like just because, you got to get up close and personal with the banking section that still lives there. And you just kind of remember like all the great drivers who raced on that thing. And it feels like you're entering like you're entering like a great place. You know what I mean? Like it makes you go into Monza, into the track, even onto the track. The facility is perfect. Everything is pristine. It's like, you're like in greatness. It's really weird feeling.
Yeah. That sounds like an awesome feeling rather than a weird one.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, not weird. I guess I should have said awesome, but like at the same time, it kind of blows your mind, right? Like, because I'm from Keene, Ontario, and it's like I'm racing in like Monza. I'm like competing on a track that has so much history, in a high class racing series. To go from that to there for me, it was eye-opening. It was a great experience. There were some weird moments. Like one day it was like raining and I was hanging out in the garages and I took the scooter and I was like scooting over to where the banking was because I'd never seen it before, but it was like this dark and like overcast and misty. And like I crawled through the trees and then you get there and you see the banking and it's just like, it goes forever and it curves around. So you're like looking, you can see the curve on it disappear into the woods. And then you look the other direction, it's the same thing. And it feels like it goes like around the world. It feels like it goes forever, but it's just, you can just feel like the history that was there. You can just feel it. That's why, it was weird. That was weird.
Yeah, and the banking is crazy too. I've never been to Monza, but I've been to the old Brooklands circuit just outside of London and Weybridge, and they still have like a section of the banking, and you can walk up it, and boy, is it steep. It must have been crazy back in the day to watch the cars flying around there.
Oh, dude, you try and run up the banking, forget it.
Yeah, it's not going to happen.
There's no way. It's so steep, dude. Like, I couldn't believe how steep it was. Like watching some of the drivers do it now is hilarious because they can barely do it themselves. And like, I was like sprinting trying to get up this thing, dude.
Amazing.
No, it's a great track. It's a great place. For fans out there who've never been, it's a great weekend to go watch a Formula One race. The Italian fans, the Tifosi, they're so passionate, and I'm a Ferrari fan. Like, it's awesome. It's such a cool place to go to, especially when Formula One rolls into town.
I can only imagine.
So Verstappen sets the record, 10 straight Grand Prix victories. Dailey, did you ever think that you would see a driver accomplish this feat after Sebastian Vettel had done it?
No, I mean that's the amazing thing, right? But it seems like records are made to be broken, and it just seems that every time a record is broken, it does or set, it's just like, oh boy, I wonder if we'll ever see this happen again. Excuse me, in our lifetime. But I mean, I think it just underlines the historic nature of like what Max and Red Bull are doing, because I mean, they're not just like rewriting the record book. They've ripped the record book in half and they're writing their own. It's crazy because excuse me, Hammy and I, we were talking about it earlier today on our podcast, and we're just like, with 8 races to go now, the opportunity for somebody to do something and win a race now, I mean, those opportunities are going really, really fast. And the thing is, they're almost invincible. And that's the thing. I mean, the car is bulletproof. The Honda engine has just been like super reliable. Just don't ask Yuki Tsunoda that. It's just incredible that when everything aligns and things go right, it's amazing. It really is.
As soon as I saw Yuki's car peel off on that first formation lap, I was like, uh-oh. I was like, is this the start of something?
Yeah. Well, it was weird, right? I mean, when was the last time we saw Honda power units let go like that, right? I mean, especially on a formation lap, that was bizarre.
No, Honda's stuff has been, solid all season long. I haven't had any, DNFs or that I can really think of that was power unit related. It's been pretty bulletproof. So that leads me to wonder that if, Max had made mention on the radio towards the end there that he was having some issues with something, I wonder if that has anything to do with it.
Yeah, it'll be interesting if it shakes out the wash in the next couple of days, because sometimes, they drop these little hints and then they don't tell you what it was. And then sometimes it sort of comes out as one of these little bits that kind of like drops into the news cycle there after a race. So who knows? He was kind of shady about it. He acknowledged there was an issue, but didn't want to talk about it, outside of the interviews.
Yeah, during the interview session with the FIA press conference, he did shy away from the question. He never really answered the question. Basically said that he would have to check back with the team as to what it could have possibly been. And I think that's probably code for I'm not telling you anything. So that's what it is. Okay, so obviously with this consecutive win streak that Max has now set, if we look back at, Sebastian Vettel obviously was the first record holder with 9 back in 2013. If I am not mistaken, his record went Belgium, Italy, Singapore, South Korea, Japan, India, Abu Dhabi, USA, Brazil. And for Max, it's been a straight run since Miami. So Miami, Monaco, Spain, Canada, Austria, Great Britain, Hungary, Belgium, Netherlands, and now the Italian Grand Prix. Alberto Ascari, I guess, would be next in line with 7, because his was done from they did his from 1952 to 1953. I think that's the way Ascari's
and they only raced like, what was it, 8 times a year or something. They hardly had any races and it's, granted, it was a little bit more difficult to get around back in those days, but it's, any way you look at it and whoever you compare it to, it's just crazy impressive what they've done, right?
Yeah, and then like Schumacher, I guess, would also be in that mix with 7. I think his was 04. I don't like. I think his running order was Europe, Canada, USA, France, Britain, Germany, Hungary, if I remember correctly. I could be a little off on that one, but still, Dailey, to set this type of a record. I mean, this isn't an easy thing for a driver to do, because there is so much that can go wrong and get in the way of things like reliability, like we had just spoken about, or your teammate getting into the mix at some point, getting in your way, and your other competitors also catching up. And it was interesting. I was talking about this on SportsCenter on Sunday, and it was the question was basically, is this more the car or more the driver? And I fired back with driver, simply because of how perfect you have to be to go on a run like this. Like, you have to be perfect. You can't make a mistake anywhere. And there were lots of opportunities for him to make an error. Trying to think, ones that stood out to me, and we'll see what yours are, but mine were like Miami in the searing heat, and it was hot there, man. Like, I was there. It was hot. I was there covering that race, and it was hot. The searing heat in Miami, starting as far back as he did at that track on the weaker tire strategy compared to his teammate, having to muscle his way through the field to get that victory, take it away from Sergio Perez. And then another one that stands out is Monaco when it downpoured, trying to keep it off the walls. Very easy track, obviously, to lose it and to ruin your race. Zandvoort stands out as well with torrential downpour on slick tires, and then having to manage a damp and drying track, and at some points trying to hold off a hungry Fernando Alonso. And then today also stands out to me as well with just playing cat and mouse with Carlos Sainz.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree. I mean, it is the driver. I mean, he's done so well in some adverse situations, but he's also maximizing the package that he has. It's letting him do what he needs to do. If he had like a car that wasn't reliable, or it had and have we identified any weaknesses or any situations that this RB19 or any of its predecessors of the last 2 years has? I mean, they're far and very few between, right? So I mean, he's able to lean on that car and push it to the extremes that he needs to, and just, I mean, it's amazing. It doesn't matter to see what sort of the deficit is. He's still able to really dig himself out of the hole. I mean, go back to like Belgium last year. What did he qualify in? I can't remember what it was, but I mean, he was way down at the start, and he made up an obscene amount of places right off of the start. And you kind of think, okay, well, he's definitely on for a podium at the very least, and I think he went on to win that race. I mean, I don't remember too many that he hasn't won in recent years, right? So it's amazing just how good he's been week in, week out for such a long time. I mean, he's racing at such an incredibly high level. Yeah. It's nuts. It really is.
Starting grid for the 2022 Belgian Grand Prix, he started 14th.
That's right. I was going to say, I thought he started 9th, but I think he was 14th. I think by the end of lap 1, he was already up to 9th. That's what I was going to say. Maybe started 9th, but I think that if you go back and check like the lap charts and stuff like that, I think he made 5 spots up like on lap 1 alone.
Wow.
It's just like, wow, he's already in like the top 10, and it's just like one car after another. But I'd like to get your take on this today, because like you said, he's playing cat and mouse with Carlos, and I feel that like younger Max just tries to pass him at the first opportunity that he gets. But I think Max, knowing that, he's got the better car and he could just pick the moment that he wanted. I mean, he had some looks and stuff like that. And then as they kind of went a little bit further, I was kind of thinking, okay, because he kept saying over race radio, okay, well, Carlos is sliding around a little bit. So obviously he's looking at like the deg that's going on with Carlos's tires. I'm just like, well, if he just doesn't pass him straight out on the track, the next thing you got to kind of keep in mind is that the call that's going to come from the pit wall, I'm throwing that advantage to the Red Bull side rather than Ferrari as to when they make that pit call. There were too many things going in Max's favor. It was just a question of time, and I felt like he just sat there, completely chilled out. I think the only thing that might have forced him or Red Bull a little bit, if Charles was able to close that gap a little bit and start pushing Max from behind, but he had a second or 2 seconds, whatever it was. I don't think it was more than 2 seconds. Maybe it was a second and a half at most. But Charles wasn't able to get to the point where he could actually start like really agitating Max. I think Max at that point is just like, I'm just going to sit here. When it comes, it comes. And when it came, he disappeared pretty quick, right?
I think one of the things that, he's really learned from that 2021 championship battle with Lewis was patience.
Yes.
And you could hear Jean-Pierre Lambiase, his engineer, on his radio to him during the race, telling him to be patient and almost giving him a reminder that he kind of needs to rein it in at some points, because he can be a little bit aggressive at times. But one of the things that I think I've seen from him in the past 2 seasons is that maturity that I speak of. Anthony Davidson actually pointed out a really great spot when trying to get past Carlos Sainz, trying to take the inside on the second part of the first chicane.
Mm-hmm.
And the season that in 2021 that I had mentioned, where he parked his car on top of Lewis Hamilton's head, that I still question that one because of the sausage curb that's there, the big orange one. And that's been there since like ever. Like it was there when I was racing there, and we're going back. Like it's been there for a long time. And so he knows that that's there, right? So he knows that. But I think backing out of it and not forcing the issue today, or on Sunday, I should say, with Carlos, I think that shows a level of maturity. I know he's getting pretty frustrated being behind Carlos for as long as he was because of their straight line speed. And I think for him, it was like, I need to make a move here at some point, because his tires were going to start to dag the longer he tried to get past him, because Carlos had great straight line speed today in that Ferrari.
Yeah.
Like they were very strong, brand new engine. That thing was like firing on all cylinders for sure today. And so for Max, it was having to get by Carlos as soon as possible after whatever was 10, 12 laps. And for me, it was that level of maturity, just waiting, setting him up properly, and then forcing him into a mistake. And that's exactly what he did.
Yeah, compared to, say, like Sergio, who when he was behind Carlos, how many times did he bail out of that overtake at turn 1 and go into the runoff area? It was twice, 3 times. It was at least twice. It could have been 3 times. Yeah. And not to say that Sergio's immature, but you could just tell like he was really trying to get his way, like get around, and he just. But again, I mean, it came eventually.
Yeah.
But yeah, much different than his teammate.
I think for Sergio, his race coming home P2 today, I mean, good race. Not great qualifying again, but yeah, he drove really well, I think. It was interesting to see just how difficult it was for Sergio, though, to get past the Ferraris. And I think like that's like both he and Max have the same equipment. It's not like they don't have the same equipment. They do, because they have the budget cap to provide that. It's not like back in the day where Schumacher was getting, a lot of the best equipment and Barrichello wasn't, right? It's not like that anymore. So I think like for Max, that it's kind of like it shows you just the level of driving that he is at right now.
Yeah.
For me anyways. That's how I mean, like everyone's always like, well, yeah, Sergio hasn't been great lately, and yeah, no kidding. But at the same time, I think when Sergio is still, when he's driving great, there's still that difference. There's still that big delta that's there that is because of Max's talent.
Yeah, I kind of wonder too, like, back at the sort of late spring, early summer when Sergio had that real low point in the season. And I just kind of wonder if he was kind of overthinking it and overdriving it just because he's trying to match up to his teammate. And I kind of feel that if he just kind of stays within himself, that he's a much better driver. I think he was just trying too hard to try and close that gap to Max, and he was just, pushing it outside the envelope.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely agree. Outside of Sergio, I mean, Carlos Sainz getting his first podium of the season. Carlos was great all weekend long. Fantastic. Didn't put a wheel wrong, and really, really showed his pace. And I think like Charles Leclerc there was some complaining at the end of Q3, right? Like, why didn't he get the toe or something? Okay, so here's that scenario. So the scenario where we're talking about with Q3, and I guess Carlos was supposed to get the toe, but at the end of the day, Verstappen was in between both of them during qualifying.
Yep.
And then Alonso was in front of Leclerc. And so why is Leclerc complaining about this when he could have caught up to Alonso and used him for the draft?
Yeah, exactly. That was kind of funny too, because like that note from the stewards came up in qualifying.
Yes.
And then it quickly kind of disappeared quite right at like afterwards, that they weren't going to investigate it either. Yeah. And Fred Vasseur kind of like brushed it off. It's like, yeah, well, we still did it within the regulations. And I was just kind of like, it was a little bit kind of funny how it became like a non-issue.
So I got a note from the FIA like pointing out this new directive that they were going to have because of what we've seen in the past with other cars lining up to draft off of each other and no one wanting to go first, and all of these really slow outlaps because of it, which led to other drivers kind of getting messed over for their quali laps. And so the directive that was put out that every car had to stay within a minimum of 1 minute, 41 seconds, I believe it was, to be exact. It was either 141 or 142. It was one or the other.
Yep.
Regardless of that, Leclerc, so the Ferraris were noted, of this, especially Carlos Sainz. But the reason that it didn't end up going through is because also in that directive, it says that they could be let off, whoever does it, could be let off the hook for, it's like, extreme circumstances. There could be a circumstance that allows them not to get a penalty because of XYZ. And so for the Ferraris, the XYZ was when they were doing the prep. I believe it was the prep. It was either the prep lap or it was the prep lap. When they were doing the prep lap, they were also trying to stay out of the way of other drivers who were on the push lap. And so they didn't want to interfere, get in the way, and then get a penalty for that. And so moving out of the way to avoid certain situations. And I think they were just over a 141. I think they were like just, if I'm not mistaken. So I think like just for that directive thing, it was, I think like for the FIA, that directive should have been issued, before the weekend started, because once you get into the weekend, that this is going to happen. This always happens at Monza. Always. So these drivers are always going to do it. They're always going to be trying to get that advantage, right, Dailey? So,
yep.
I think for Carlos Sainz, bringing it back, he was fantastic this weekend. This has to be a big boost of confidence for him. And it really looked like he just fought like hell out there today.
It did, and he just seemed to me to be determined that he was going to get a good result today, because he didn't seem like, there was that mistake where he locked up and then Max passed him, but that was about it. From what was a pretty flawless weekend, because if you go back to quali, you have Charles that takes provisional pole. Then Max comes along, steals provisional pole. We're like, yeah, well, because of course that's what Max does, because he's just too good. And then Carlos comes along and then pips Max by what was like a couple hundredths or something like that. And, you could hear the roar over the television feed and everything like that. And I'm just like, that's impressive. That's really impressive. To beat Max like that, and, it was great to see. But, he had a really good scrap with Max, but then he didn't cave to the pressure from his teammate either. Charles had that big lockup on lap 50 or 49 or whatever.
51 of 51.
Yeah, right at the very end there, kind of going into the chicane, and just kind of like one all or nothing kind of lunge. It's just like, don't commit the cardinal sin of taking your teammate out. But
man, I get it. You want to like race your teammate and stuff, but if I'm like Fred Vasseur, man, I am on the horn to that guy. Like you better not run into the back. Like, do not take each other out. Like, I would have been all over the team radio with him, because I thought one of the interesting thing was Carlos was doing so much defending and fighting against Sergio towards the end of that race. You're killing the tire, right? Like you're degging the tire a ridiculous amount, where Leclerc is just kind of hanging back. Like he was always kind of there, right? Like he was always just kind of hanging around, hanging in there. I think that he didn't want to get involved in that little scrap. So when Perez finally got past Sainz, Leclerc would have a bit more tire to go and fight his teammate.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because he was just right there, but he just didn't want to get too involved, like you say, and he just never really did.
But Dailey, though, we're here, like we're racing, right? Like I think, like if that were true, like I think Leclerc should have been dusting it up. Like he should have been getting in there too, because you don't know what's going to happen with Sergio's tires. Like you don't know how quickly that was going to dag on him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, he really could have mixed it up and thrown the gloves off, so to speak, and really made more of a challenge. Like I don't know, like in that opening phase before lap 15 when Max finally passed Carlos. But I was just like, I wanted, like, I was willing, like, come on, get right on there, get on Max's gearbox. Let's hassle this guy and let's see what really happens. I mean, I don't know if he wanted to. I don't know if he could. I was jumping back and forth between the different cars, and he was pretty quiet on the radio. Like there wasn't a lot of chatter going back between Charles and the pits compared to some of the other drivers. Yeah. And I was trying to kind of get inside of his head and try and figure it out, and I'm not sure I really reached a conclusion as to what he was thinking or doing, so I don't know, we'll leave that one out there.
So Leclerc obviously finishing P4. He didn't seem too upset after the race either, so there's that. I'm not too sure how because he was doing the interview with Sky Sports, right, and he just seemed quite jovial, and I was like, maybe deep down inside, you're probably not that happy with Carlos Sainz, on older tires, worn out tires, beating you. Like, I don't know. Like, it's just interesting. I think that driver pairing is a good one. I think it's a strong one. And I think the more comfortable Sainz gets with everything, especially the team, and then knowing his place within it, I think we're going to start to see who's who's the top dog at that team. I mean, obviously Leclerc's one lap quality pace he's incredible, but I still think that Sainz is a really good race car driver all in general. George Russell came home 5th. Good race from George, considering all that he had to deal with in his race as well. And then obviously his teammate Lewis Hamilton finishing 6th. Then you have Alex Albon in 7th. So the Mercedes of George and Lewis, well, it's a little surprising to see how far back they were. I think that just goes to show us how strong Ferrari was this weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing I thought was interesting about Lewis was, we'll talk about, I guess we should talk about the incident with Oscar Piastri, but it was interesting, like out of those top runners, Lewis was the only guy that started on the hards. Everybody else started on the mediums. And after he had his pit stop, he was on the radio to Bono saying, I don't think these tires are basically going to make it to the end, is what he was saying. But then that last phase, I mean, boy, did he ever have pace, because he was behind that little squabble of Albon, Lando, and Piastri, and he gobbled up all that space between them on the track. Of course, he has that little coming together with Oscar, but I mean, he got around. Well, obviously got past Oscar, and obviously Oscar came out the worst for that. But then Lewis, fortunately from his point of view, he didn't have any damage. He passes Lando, he passes Alex, comes back from the stewards that, hey, you were 100% at fault, at Varianti there at turns 4 and 5 with that coming together with Piastri. You're getting a 5-second penalty for that. And then by the time it's all said and done, he had, the last I noticed was about 6-ish seconds, over Alex Albon. So he didn't actually end up I mean, it could have been a lot worse for him, but it was amazing. But, when you look at the job that Ferrari's done recently and then Mercedes, I mean, there's no real surprise that they've leapfrogged Aston Martin in the Constructors Championship. And just sort of speaking specifically about George and Lewis, I mean, sure, they haven't had the big, glitzy, big results this year, but with the car that hasn't been the greatest and the car that they've had obvious challenges with, where they've actually changed philosophy like midstream, like after half a dozen races or whatever it was, they've been consistent. They've been bringing home points together. And, I know that that George had a DNF recently and et cetera, but still, I mean, that's 250 whatever points that they have in the constructors. I mean, those are some pretty well-earned points for Mercedes, because every single one of those, I feel like they fought for them hard out on the track.
It's shocking to see them second in the constructor standings, just considering the start to the season, that they even had. Daily, I am shocked that they are, second currently in the constructors, just, behind Red Bull. I wouldn't never have thought that when we got through testing and then the race started in Bahrain. I was like, there's no way this team is going to be second in maybe not even top three, considering where they are at the start of the season. So the turnaround, like you said, that they have had is extremely impressive. I mean, how much faster can this car get that Mercedes has? I mean, maybe a little bit. I think they're going to be strong in Singapore. I think they'll probably give Red Bull a good run there. But outside of that, I have this feeling that they've probably start to turn back the development on this car, and they've already started working on next year's car. They did that a while back, but I think like it's going to be full push mode on that 2024 car, because there is a lot of work that needs to be done there, and from here on out it's just learning for them. So whatever they develop for next year's car, I bet you they just throw it on this car right here and they see what comes of it, right? Just to save on some of that aerodynamic testing restrictions that they are currently under. And then obviously burn through the rest of their budget that they have now, so they can save that budget for 2024 cars. So I think like for them, they've set themselves up really well. I think they've set themselves up well for 2024. I honestly think that they could probably get back into this fight with Red Bull next season. You can kind of hear it in Christian Horner's voice at some points when he's asked about next season, when he's asked about all this kind of stuff. So it is something, there is something there. And I'm quite fascinated to see how it turns out for Mercedes. As for Alex Albon, I mean, this guy has been absolutely incredible this season. Right? Like, holy hell, guy comes home P7, like in a car that probably shouldn't be there. I don't think
that's a fair comment. Fair comment.
I mean, you're talking, we are literally, this is how you and I are talking right now. Red Bull, Ferrari, Mercedes, Williams. So if you were to go back, Daily, to Bahrain and tell me that by the time we got past summer break, we would be naming teams in that order and how they finish within a race, I would have said you're nuts.
And you would have been justified doing so. I pulled up some stats and I got them here on my notepad. So you look at the Constructors Championship for 23.
Like how you have a notepad, dude. Yeah. That's awesome.
Well, I did. I punched it up on the fly because I didn't have the tabs open. That's so awesome. I quickly scratched it down. So in 2023, after 14 races, Williams has 21 points in the Constructors, all thanks to Alex Albon.
Yeah.
22 between Albon, De Vries, and Nick Latifi. They had 8. Go back to 21, they had 23 points, care of Nick Latifi and George Russell. George had 16 points, 20 they had 0 points, 19 they had 1 point for the entire season. Yeah. So far this season, after 14 races, even though they're still 2 points behind where they were in 21, all those points are coming courtesy of Alex Albon. And I know that's not a lot of points compared to up at the top, but that actually for a team like Williams, I think is massive.
Yeah.
And I'm really impressed because I think finally they've got the right person there as team principal in James Vowels, because I don't think you see that kind of improvement under the previous like regime of Jos Capito. I mean, there was some improvements, but not really. They were marginal at best. And, we talked about it on our podcast a couple of months ago. There was a quote where Vowels was saying something that he wanted something developed specifically for the car. He wanted it done in 3 months. And the response that came back from the design team was like, oh, usually that would take us 3 years. To which I think that must have been a real, oh my God, what have I gotten myself into moment for James Vowels. But here's a guy that's been with Mercedes over the past 10 years of dominance, and he comes to a team like Williams. I mean, and let's face it, for Williams, the only way to go was up. And I think that's what we're seeing, and why we're having conversations about Alex Albon being where he is directly because of James Vowels. And I love Alex. I think he's a super talented driver. I think it's unfortunate the way that it worked out for him at Red Bull. And I think it was the right opportunity at the wrong time. It just things, everything that probably could have gone wrong for Alex Albon during his Red Bull stint, it did. But he's rebounded nicely, and I think that he's doing some great things there. I think he deserves a lot of respect and a lot of credit.
One of the things that James Vowels said to me when I got to hang out with him a bit, have dinner with him at the Williams factory and stuff when I was at the British Grand Prix, was the fact that when he was at Mercedes, they always had top line equipment. They had the best equipment around, and then they had spares of those best pieces of equipment.
Wow.
He says with Williams, where he's at now, he's like, he doesn't have the best equipment and there are no spares.
Gosh.
Yeah, just incredible to see, what he and that team have done working together. I see him, he's a very motivational guy. Like there was a speech that he had given to the team recently that I had seen, and he was talking a lot about how, like, when things get really tough, you usually end up getting scared, and he's like, one of the best things to do is keep pushing into the fear, and you'll eventually get to the other side of it, and it won't be as scary as you thought it was going to be. And so it was like a very motivational thing to the entire team. I think one of the things for this team is that internally has been divided for a really long time. And I think having, James there now, he's really found a way of bringing everybody together. And that shows in the work, right? And that shows in the car, and that shows in how you bring parts to the car and how hard you work and all of these different things down the line, right? And you just add the great driver to the mix as well. And I think Alex really fits in the team really well there. He's very comfortable. I think he knows that this is his team, right? He's finally, I think for him, the pressure of being under that Red Bull Racing sort of umbrella, being away from that, has allowed him to just relax a lot more. And that's why I think we're getting the performances that we are getting. Like, this is a really great driver. And I just remember, a lot of the stuff seeing from him in his Formula 2 days. And so once he got to Formula 1 and things really started to break down for him, it was a little shocking for me to watch, because I knew just how good this driver was.
Yeah.
And so now that he's at Williams, I think we are really seeing that. But I think we're also seeing the, coming together of a team at the same time. Really great story. Really happy for them. I mean, all the crap that they've gone through over the years, it's good stuff. I like it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I've always been a fan of Williams. I grew up in the era of Nigel Mansell when I was a kid. You go over to Damon Hill, and then JV was there. He got his chip there in, what was it, 97?
97,
yeah. I loved that team. And then, it just became so painful, just like how the wheels fell off. I mean, if you kind of go back as recently as 15 or 16, I mean, this was a team that still had like an outside shot for a podium on any given Sunday. And they really, they just disappeared into the abyss there. So it's great to see them starting to poke their heads back up again, because this isn't a team that's just been on the grid. This is a team that's won races and championships. It's painful to watch.
Yeah. so much heritage, so much legacy within that team at the same time. And again, like you said, there were some really dark days there, and it's great to see where they were to where they've come to now, and also Doralton giving them the investment that they need to make those jumps and leaps it's been really great to see. Lando Norris finishing P8 in the McLaren. Difficult race weekend for McLaren. They did bring a new rear wing to the car to kind of help trim it out a bit more and help with that straight line speed, and just didn't really work out for them this weekend, I don't think. And, obviously, like you had mentioned earlier, he had that coming together with his teammate Oscar Piastri, and Andrea Stella, said to us after the race, like he was not happy with either one of them at all, saying, quote, "There should never be contact between two McLaren cars." He was not a happy guy at the end of this one, Dailey, and nor should he be. I mean, I don't know how, if you're Lando and Oscar, you make contact there like that.
Yeah. It's just like the old rule is you never drive into your teammate kind of thing. And, it's just like, it's a good moment because they didn't take each other out. I mean, Oscar's incident, I mean, his P12 was because of his coming together with Lewis there at the latter stages of the race. But it's just you guys have a good car, and even though they weren't quite on it this weekend, as we've seen over the past several races, I mean, this should have been like an easy, or I would say easy, but they should have felt confident that they could take like a double points finish home. It's like, the wing's not working like you said, Tim, but still there were points there to be had, and maybe. I don't want to say luck or fate or whatever, but it's just like it's funny how things even out over the course of a race weekend. But I saw like Stella's comments, and he's totally right. There's nothing in what he said about like Lando and Oscar, that I did disagree with. It's like, sure, if you think you're faster than your teammate, go for it, but be smart about it.
Yeah, and like at least like be more forceful with the team. To make them make the decision to let you by. Yeah. At least be as forceful with them as you can. But yeah, they those are two cars, obviously, at this point. They should not be coming together, man. They should be doing everything they can to get points for this team, considering where they started at the beginning of the season. Currently, McLaren 5th in the constructor standings with 115 points in front of them daily. Aston Martin, Fernando Alonso just coming home, scoring points in 9th place. Man, such a weird thing with this team, right? But I think this was a track that they knew they weren't going to be that competitive at. I remember, I heard from Fernando Alonso after qualifying, and he said they basically qualified where they thought they were going to. It was in between. What did he say? He said like it was in between like 9th and 12th. And I think he was 10th, if I remember correctly, where he started. But like, regardless, basically not a strong weekend for Aston Martin, and for them to go from, being in a fight with Mercedes for that second place in the constructors, they've fallen down to 4th, is probably pretty disappointing for this team.
Well, it has to be. I mean, like, I think that, the question of recovering to like second in the constructors, I think it's going to be a bit of a pipe dream for them at the moment, because Mercedes 273, Aston Martin 217. I mean, Mercedes is quickly becoming a dot on the horizon, just disappearing down the road there. I mean, the shocking thing for them was, I know going into this race, they didn't have a huge lead over Ferrari in the constructors. I think it was plus or minus 15 points. It was less than 20, something like that. It wasn't a lot. Ferrari, they brought home 27 points today between Charles and Carlos. And the thing is now, and I was thinking about it after the race when I was looking at the updated standings, okay, there's a lot of like ground between Aston and McLaren. I mean, McLaren's got 115. There's 102 points there, but I couldn't help but thinking to myself, had McLaren started the season stronger, instead of not waiting, but getting to the point just in those couple of races before the summer break, we saw that quantum leap forward in the performance of that car. It's just like, if they'd started stronger, Aston Martin might, not be, they might be locked in a battle with McLaren at this point in the season. So, it's just, it's really kind of shocking to see, because we know when that car is working well. And to be quite honest, I didn't think this would be a strong track for them either. But boy, I mean, talk about like a really sort of black and white sort of season. It's just like it's highs and lows for them. I mean, when they've been good, they've been really good. Yeah. I mean, how many times has Fernando been on the podium? Like 7 times this year, whatever it was. I mean, great stuff. And then when they're cold, they're ice cold, man.
Yeah.
And today was this week was one of those ice cold weekends, unfortunately.
Yeah, it hasn't been good for them at all. I think once we get to Singapore, it'll probably be a different story for them. Yeah. That's a track that I think they're going to excel at. It is a track that suits their car. This, Monza really, really didn't. So, hats off to Fernando for capturing some points this weekend. Disappointing weekend for Lance again. I mean, this time, like, the guy, he's got no luck, Dailey. Holy jeez. So started the weekend, Felipe Drugovich is their reserve driver. And every F1 team has to run their reserve drivers, rookie driver, young driver in an FP1 session throughout the season. And so Aston Martin decided to throw Felipe into the car for this race in free practice 1. So they used Lance's car for that. And then in free practice 2, they had a fuel pump issue with the car. Then in free practice 3, since we have the tire allocation for this weekend where you only get 11 tires, for Lance only getting a handful of laps, really, not getting through all of the tire, and then having to throw yourself into qualifying with a car you don't really know in terms of the balance, and trying to qualify this thing that you don't know because you never got to set it up. So just a totally disappointing weekend for him. Drove well in the race to get himself to where he was. I mean, that has to be very, deflating for a driver when you're starting like dead last and then, fighting your way up to P16. He was in some battles for, I think it was P12, P11 at some points, but yeah, again, just tough weekend for the guy, just waiting for it to click for him,
Yeah, it's been, the season for Lance just started wrong, right? When he broke his wrist, and I feel like he never recovered from that. Physically he recovered from it, but it just seemed like it just sort of set the wrong tone to the year, and it just, it just seems like it was that, and it was this, and another thing, and it's just like I feel like, no pun intended, the guy can't catch a break at the moment, you know?
No, but seriously, you're right.
Yeah. It's just like, how many more weird things can go wrong for a guy? And it's just like, it must be so frustrating, just so frustrating, especially knowing that, like, on, more often than not, you're going to have a competitive car. With some examples being, the contrary to that, Monza being one, but, probably most of the time you're going to have a pretty competitive car, and, the latest weird thing comes along. So who knows? Poor Lance.
Ah, man. Valtteri Bottas getting that last points paying position. That's a really nice drive from him on Sunday. Really nice.
I'll be really honest with you, Tim. That completely took me by surprise, because I was so focused on what was happening with the Ferraris. I was really focused on what, if Lewis was going to be able to hold on to that P6, and whether or not, he was going to fall back behind Albon or Lando, or potentially even Fernando at one point. I was really focused on that. And then when I looked at the final race classification, I see Valtteri at P10. I'm like, hey, wait, where did Valtteri come from? That's awesome. Good for him. I thought that was a great result for him in Alpha. I really do.
Yeah, it's awesome. Like, you see that there was, the battle, like even Logan Sargent was in on it at some points, trying to hang on to that P10. And, Logan drove really well this weekend at the same time. Obviously not on the same level as as Alex, and there are many who are. I thought that battle for that final points paying position was really exciting. I mean, you even had Liam Lawson in there mixing it up as well, just in his second Grand Prix daily, like his first full weekend.
Yep. Well, we were having this conversation. It's like, well, like there isn't like you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't situation with a broken hand for Danny Ricciardo. Like if you come back too soon, you might be kind of screwed, because then maybe you kind of have like the same sort of situation like Lance was faced with at the beginning of the year. If you wait too long, maybe Liam Lawson does more. But I'm just like, why is nobody talking about Yuki Tsunoda? I mean, like, like Danny did some pretty good like work, compared to Yuki those first couple of races before he got injured. And look at what Liam Lawson's done. And like, if I'm sitting there, like in like AlphaTauri, like head office, I'm kind of thinking, wow, what is my best pairing? Because I mean, Yuki's been in that car for 2.5 years now, and it's just like And granted, Dan had been out of Formula One for a long time, but he wasn't conditioned compared to the rest of the drivers. And Liam, I mean, wow. I mean, what he's come in at the last moment to do at Zandvoort, and then this weekend, I'm seriously impressed with what Liam Lawson has done in the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think outside of that, it's like, what could have Yuki Tsunoda have done if he, hadn't have pulled off with engine issues? On the formation lap? It kind of makes you wonder at the same time, right? As for Daniel Ricciardo, update on his injury, Christian Horner updated everyone at the end of this one. Obviously, Ricciardo breaking his wrist at the Dutch Grand Prix. Horner said that it would be optimistic if he were to be ready for Japan. So that means he will miss Singapore and just most likely will miss Japan at the same time. Probably won't be back until Qatar in October at the earliest. So I don't think Red Bull really want to rush him back, Daily.
Yeah, nor should you. I mean, like, that's why he's in a tough spot. Like, I mean, he obviously wants to get like a race seat for next year, but I mean, it was just horrible timing for him. And I thought he'd done really well in those previous couple of races before, he had that crash at Zandvoort. And it's just, it's tough, but I really think that it poses an interesting scenario for AlphaTauri for 2024, because they're kind of like relaunching this team, right? Yeah. And I feel like they're trying to come up with like a new identity. And I think that they could really do that in many ways. And the driver pairing could be one of them. And, certainly I think Dan Ricciardo's made a good case for himself, has his Liam Lawson. So I think they got some hard questions to ask themselves, like over the course of, the next weeks, months, the off season, whatever it is. But it's I did think I'd be like talking about AlphaTauri in this way, because it just tends to be like a feeder team. But it's kind of really developed in a way I don't think that anybody's really expected. So it's kind of cool.
I want to talk about Alpine. It's horrible weekend for them. Pierre Gasly finishing P15. Then you got Esteban Ocon, who DNF'd, but at the same time, I mean, he wasn't in the fight either way. Nope. So the engine in particular sounds like it could be a bit of an issue. So the engines are basically sealed now for those of you listening. You can't really do too much to the engine unless you have a very good reason for your particular power unit to have reliability issues. And then they allow you to open it up and fix and retool and make it better. For Alpine, though, they're claiming they're down on horsepower. So my question is, how the hell do you get down on horsepower when you've been given all this time to be on the same footing as everybody else? I just don't get that. Like, look at everyone else who's had to go through that. Look at all the other teams. Look at Honda. Yeah,
exactly. Well, it's crazy. I'm just looking now at the Q1 times. So Gasly and Ocon, they got knocked out in Q1. They set basically the identical time. Like Pierre set a 1:22.545. Esteban set a 1:22.548. So Carlos Sainz had the fastest time in Q1. His was a 1:21.96. So I mean, they're like 0.6 off, like that right there, and that's big. That's a big difference right there. And I mean, the cutoff time, Logan was the slowest car, I guess, or the first of the last quickest cars. So he qualified, or he made it out of Q1 in 15th. His time was a 1:21.93. So they're like, that was his fastest Q1 time. So I mean, that's, there's quite a bit of a difference there. I mean, if that was their two fastest times compared to some of the other ones, I mean, they're like half a second off at least. I mean, that's just crazy stuff right there.
I just can't believe it compared to, like, you take a look at where Alpine was last season, and like, fighting with McLaren for, fourth and, the constructors. And it's like, how do you go from that to where you are now? And there's been glimpses where, Alpine's been really good, like really, really good. My question is, like, and they're probably going to be strong. Like, I think Alpine will probably be pretty strong once we get to Singapore and a few of the other races that we get to later on this season as well. But, you go to a track like Vegas, like, then that's probably the next big power track that we have coming up. I mean, it's going to look like a similar situation. So for them, it's kind of like, my question is, how did it get like this? Like, how did it get to the point where you're suffering from a lack of horsepower in the power unit, considering how long they've had to work on this thing? They have two really good drivers. They have a really good, like, the structure of the team itself, like the crew at the track, like, very strong. Like, it's a strong team, and it's like, how did they lose their way on that? And then how are they going to convince everyone to let them open up the engine and either bump up the horsepower somehow, or make some sort of an excuse where you can just say, hey, this is a reliability issue, and maybe that fixes things for them?
It's interesting too when you think about Oscar Piastri and Fernando Alonso and the way that they really, pulled the Band-Aid off and moved to different teams, or, maybe not moved to in so much in Oscar's case, but it kind of makes you wonder, what did these two really know, or what concerns did they have? Because I mean, especially Fernando looked pretty ruthless in the way that he moved over to Aston Martin.
Good point.
And I'm sure, as much as Fernando's sitting there right now thinking, you got a couple of things maybe to worry about here, he's probably looking at Alpine thinking, I'm glad that I'm driving a green Aston Martin rather than that blue and pink Alpine right now, because they're just it's just a mess. It's so up and down.
Let's talk about there's some comments that Hamilton had made at the beginning of the weekend, speaking with Sky Sports. Basically said, I'm paraphrasing, but essentially Hamilton had said that all the teammates that he has had were stronger than the ones that Max Verstappen has had. And Hamilton's teammates, I can just rattle them off here for you: Alonso, Heikki Kovalainen, Button, Rosberg, Bottas, Russell. Okay, we've got Alonso with two world championships for Alonso. You got Button with one. You've got Rosberg with one. You got Bottas with 0, and you've got Russell with 0, and you've got Kovalainen with 0. What do you think?
I don't disagree with Lewis's statements. I mean, to come out on top of that battle with Fernando way back in the day, and considering like how young he was, I mean, and then again with Jensen, and then those years with Rosberg, and as toxic and nasty as those were. And I mean, and like you say, I mean, Rosberg beat Lewis in like 16, and like when Lewis was like when he was unbeatable in those cars, right? And I mean, like obviously, and I don't want to make this sort of derogatory towards Valtteri, but I mean, Rosberg was clearly that little bit better than Bottas was. I think that Bottas was like the ideal teammate, especially for like Toto and like the Mercedes management, because he's going to win your races, he's going to bring home a ton of points, And it's just like what sort of like complaint would you have, like if like Bottas comes to you and say, hey, you're winning races, we're winning championships, yeah, Lewis is just faster than you. So but I mean you compare it to like Max's teammates, come on. I mean, I don't think there's any comp.
Verstappen's teammates, Carlos Sainz, when they were at Toro Rosso together, Daniel Ricciardo.
Yep.
I still like during those times, man, Daniel was a good driver then. Like,
yeah, that was a good 1-2 punch.
I rate Ricciardo extremely high in those years, and maybe he could get back to those. Pierre Gasly, again, though, not the Pierre Gasly that we know of now.
Yes.
Alex Albon, again, not the Alex Albon that we know of now. And Sergio Perez. So, yeah.
I would rate Perez and Ricciardo as the strongest of those teammates. And that's not to take away anything from Gasly, Sainz, etc., and Albon, but it's just that they were like at a different point in their development as drivers, being younger, whereas Ricciardo was already like a known quantity. Like he was pretty much proven. We might say like go back and look at it in 10 years and say, oh yeah, that's time that he spent at RBR with Max, that was peak Dan Ricciardo. And then Sergio Perez, I mean, he'd already been in F1 for like 10 years by the time he got to Red Bull. So I mean, they're all good drivers, but I mean, Carlos was still developing, as were the other ones. So, compared to like Lewis going up against some rock stars in like the prime of their careers, right? I mean, like Fernando was already a double world champion at that point, right?
Yeah.
And when they were teammates.
I just feel it was a little out of character for Lewis to say something like that, but I liked it. Gave us something to talk about. I think we need to remember that, Hamilton is, and here's something that no one really pointed out, like Hamilton's trying to battle for second in this constructor or in this driver's championship here. And one of the things with that is obviously currently Lewis is fourth in the driver's championship. He came out of the summer breaks saying publicly that he's going for second in this driver's world championship, trying to catch up to Sergio Perez, who's obviously Max Verstappen's teammate. So there could be a little, mind games going on there. Lewis is good at that, like we've seen him do it before in the past. He's really, really clever when it comes to that stuff, man. And, Hamilton also saying that he sees, He sees that there is no more special achievement in what Max is doing at the moment than what Schumacher did, Alonso, Vettel, Raikkonen. Horner responded to that, and he said, quote, on a positive note, it's great to see that he's signed up for another couple of years, and obviously he's still motivated, still fit enough for the challenge, and I'm sure there will be a few battles between him and Max over the next few years, end quote. You got Christian Horner, man, just firing right back, right?
Yeah, and I thought it was like a good quote, from both of them, obviously. And Lewis, he's only 6 points behind Fernando. He's got 164, Fernando 170, so that's doable. I mean, third is a realistic goal. I mean, to catch Sergio, it could happen, but then again, I would think that for that to happen, Lewis is going to need to get some good results, but then I think that, in fairness to Sergio, that if he was to give away that many points to Lewis, because he's on 219, so that's a pretty big gap, he'd have to slump pretty hard like he did earlier in the season. And I kind of feel like Sergio's found equilibrium. Like he started the season well, he won some races, he had like his dark period, and I feel like he's found his feet again. Like qualifying, could still maybe do a little bit better here and there, but I mean, that was a solid result for him today. I mean, It was a P2, but he fought for it and he worked hard for it, and I think I think that Sergio's he's pretty close to being at his best right now. I think he's getting there. He's definitely trending in the right direction.
Interesting stuff from Total Wolf earlier in the weekend. It was a question posed to him in the fact that, is what's going on right now with Red Bull, Max Verstappen, and the dominance that they are showing bad for Formula One. And essentially, one of the things that they're kind of driving at is if, the FIA were to introduce some sort of trick that could trip up Red Bull and allow the other teams to sort of claw their way back into this thing. And just for some context for the listeners and viewers who don't know much about the backstory. So in 2020, Mercedes had the best car that they have ever built, and nobody could beat them. They were incredible in 2020. And then in 2021, the FIA introduced a regulation at the last minute to the rear floor. So rear floor changes. So those were put in place essentially sort of to slow down Mercedes. There were cutouts in the floor at the back. The outcome from the floor change, though, Mercedes was not as competitive as Red Bull was. But in Silverstone, it really looked like, Mercedes unlocked a lot of the performance from the car and got themselves back into the championship fight. So for Toto, he was kind of sort of asked about, all of this. And Lewis had said on Thursday, the rules were brought in to slow down Mercedes' domination. And a few team principals said that, there shouldn't be any tinkering with the regulations to stop a team from dominating. And essentially Toto Wolff really agreed with all of that, felt that it was up to the teams to catch up, said, we can't be like the WWE and be scripted content. We don't want to be scripted content. And you know what, like, I agree with him. I just think that the regulation that's in place that they've got now, I think there needs to be some tinkering with that in terms of the aero testing regulation and the cost cap for the leading teams.
Yeah, I agree. And I agree with like Toto's comments about like not want, basically having scripted, although I wouldn't mind seeing Toto embrace his inner macho man Randy Savage. Might be kind of fun, but yeah, it's interesting, right? Because you don't want to see I don't want to see one team run away with it, right? Mm-hmm. But on the same time, and it doesn't matter Red Bull or Mercedes or Ferrari, whoever might be dominating, it kind of goes against what I think is it goes against what I believe what Formula One should be, to like introduce rules to pull somebody back in. So I agree with those comments that Toto and others have made that, yeah, okay, one team is dominating, but they're setting the bar. It's up for everyone else to catch up rather than have something legislated by the FIA to pull them back. It's just like, innovate. This is, innovate and engineer. This is what, Formula One's supposed to be about. Guys, do your jobs is basically what it is. I know it's a little bit more difficult now in a cost cap era, is that you just can't throw the car into the wind tunnel for 6 months. You can't throw endless amount of money at stuff. So granted, it is a little bit more difficult, but hey, Formula One was never supposed to be easy.
No, if they're not going to do something to sort of bring cars that get away back, like, in DTM, they were using ballast. Mm-hmm. And that actually, it made the championship extremely exciting. Like, DTM is an awesome championship to watch because you never know who's going to win either. It's kind of like IndyCar same respect. But with this, I just think the term of the aerodynamic regulation, so the chassis regulation, I think that needs to be extended. I don't think that should be changed once we get to 2026. I think that needs to be extended. I think I think they need to stick with what they've got for longer, because it's such a fast turnover, right, Dailey? I mean, the new regulation came in 2022, and then it's going to change again at the end of 2025. Well, that doesn't make any sense. That means that we're
already halfway there.
Yeah, and it's like, and you have Red Bull who's got this huge gap. So now you got to let the other teams catch up. And by the time they catch up, you're moving the goalpost again, and it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, because then, you get into like a new era of regs, and then maybe Red Bull nails it and they're still just as dominant, or maybe we kind of see history repeating itself, because when we came into the V6 turbo hybrid era, Mercedes was the one to beat, and then we changed things up in 22. Red Bull's the team to beat, and who knows, you change it again in short order. That may, who knows, right? It's just
100%.
I don't. Yeah. I don't want to do it either. So give these this era a chance to settle down. And I guess if you're not a fan of Red Bull or Max Verstappen, maybe you're not enjoying it, but give the others a chance to figure it out. Don't change it up every couple of years. I'm not a fan of that either.
Because then, what's going to happen is that if they decide to go with, what was rumored a while ago was like movable aerodynamics.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, what the hell do you think, Adrian Newey's going to be good with? Like, come on. Like,
well, it's also like inconsistent messaging, because, they've already issued all these TDs for like flexi wings and stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just like, it's like, I don't know. It's just like, I'm not sure what I'm going to get some days when I'm hearing what's proposed. I'm just like, I'm confused.
Got some questions over in the debrief, so we'll head on over there now. We'll take your questions from social media, from @Rebel Fraggle _ I'm the worst at pronouncing names, everybody, so my apologies. Cammy from LJ. Do the teams use sleep performance coaches to adjust to different time zones in the F1 schedule? That's a great question. Some of them, yes, do. I do talk to actually a lot of the performance coaches of the drivers about sleep, because sometimes when I travel to go to cover an F1 race, I always get caught up on the sleep deprivation of all of it, because I have trouble adjusting to the time zones. And so, the way that the performance coaches, they walked me through like how I should prepare. It was really quite interesting, actually. It was speaking with one of Lance Stroll's performance coaches about it, and fascinating to just understand that, like, when you're going to go for a big time change, you have to make sure that you're trying to stay on as best as time as they are. So for myself, it was going from Canada to Great Britain, time change of about 6 hours, leaving at 7 o'clock at night, getting in at 6 o'clock in the morning. And so it was basically, don't drink any coffee 2 days before your flight. So no caffeine whatsoever. Get onto your flight and then go to sleep like you normally would. And then wake up at 6 a.m. on their time. But then you have to stay up for that entire day. So you got to be up from 6 a.m. all the way through until when you're getting ready to, when sort of your bedtime is, essentially, which would, for me, it's around like 10:30 at night. And so making sure that you try to adhere to that and taking a tiny bit of melatonin. For like Carlos Sainz's was interesting too, because he was going from the UK to Australia, and his was trying to make sure he's staying awake during natural light, but that also included on the flight, but then staying away from false light, so manufactured lighting, during the times that he should be asleep. So that, because they're traveling so long to get to Australia from Europe, right? So I found that pretty fascinating. But yeah, to answer your question, a lot of them do actually have to work with sleep performance coaches or performance coaches in general, just so they can get a good grasp of how to adjust to the time zones when they land there. From Michael Payne, if Max Verstappen retired today, where would you rank him in the all-time greats? Daily.
Oh man, that is a tough question, right? Because it's one of those things. It's like, well, let's figure out where driver X, whoever that might be, Lewis, Max, whoever. Let's figure out how they rank with all the greats once they retire. But we usually assume somebody's going to retire when they're when they're ready, and like they're kind of like on the downhill side of their career. But I mean, with Max, we just don't know, right? Because he's even said himself that, he may pull the plug, or he's kind of hinted at it, that he might pull the plug sooner rather than later. But I mean, if he were to retire today, and I'm going to assume at the end of this season, which would mean it was like 3 championships in a row, man, yeah, I mean, to like retire, because he's only 25, so he's right. I'm like, when do we say like Max was like at the prime, like the peak of his career? Is he at it now? Could he get better?
There.
It's just like, but the question would be is like, if he retired now, how many chips did he leave out on the table? But I mean, certainly he'd have to be ranked up there, like with all the greats, just regardless if he races and stops, say this year or 10 years from now. I mean, like if he goes on this year and then races for another 10 years and doesn't, win another championship, we could always look back and say, oh, back in the day, Max was better than anyone. But that's an interesting one.
Yeah, it is a great question. I would say once he captures his 3rd Drivers' World Championship, so at the, I guess at this point, the trajectory for it is Japan, him capturing that 3rd Drivers' World Championship title. I would say, we can then start to have those conversations. That resume is starting to get quite robust, considering you factor in, how many, what is this winning streak going to look like? We're only at 10, right? It could go to 11 once we get to Singapore, and then it could just keep going, man. Like, there's that on top of all of it. And then I think for currently, if you just look at the drivers he's lumped in with for just 2 Drivers' World Championship, Alberto Ascari, Graham Hill, Jim Clark, Emerson Fittipaldi, Mika Hakkinen, Fernando Alonso, and Max Verstappen, all with 2 Drivers' Championships. So I think you can already begin or start to have that conversation, because I'd say Fernando Alonso, because this is a driver who should have way more than 2 World Championships in Fernando Alonso. But
100%.
If he gets that 3rd one, Dailey, you are now lumping him in with Jack Brabham, Jackie Stewart, Niki Lauda, Nelson Piquet, Ayrton Senna. And Senna, again, we don't know how far he could have gone. It could have been more as well. And that is a driver who I put it at the top of the top. He is, in my opinion, Senna, the greatest of all time, just because of what he had to do with a race car and the cars that he had and what he was able to do with those race cars. And there's not a lot of drivers out there who are going to argue with me on that one. And so that for me, like Senna, for me, he's number 1. And then we talk about Schumacher, Hamilton, obviously legendary drivers, legendary. And so I think for Max, if he adds to this resume of his, we can start to have those conversations. I don't see why not.
Well, I'll put in a little bit of a different sort of motivation for Max. So he's going to win 3. So the end of the year, he's going to be tied with his father-in-law, Nelson Piquet, who's also got 3 chips, which he won in 81, 83, and 87. Maybe he gets 1 more than the father-in-law, and then maybe he retires after he gets 4, just so, within the family, he's got the bragging rights.
And then once you get to 4, right, you're now talking Prost-Vettel. Territory. And then once you get to 5, then you're in Fangio, and then you get to 7, and that's like Schumacher and Hamilton. It's like I don't necessarily see. I honestly don't necessarily see anyone, get. I mean, it could happen. I could be wrong, but I don't see anyone getting to that, man. I still think the Hamilton Schumacher thing is out of reach for anybody.
Yeah, and I mean, like he's already like you say. I mean, you look at the names that he's lumped in with already, like Ascari, Hill, Clark, Emo. I mean, gosh, those are great drivers. I mean, and it just gets better and better. I mean, it's amazing. I guess the big question is does he keep going? And if he keeps going, how many more does he win, or does he end up in some sort of like Fernando type situation? Because I totally agree with you. I think Fernando, I think that we see that he's got like 2 world championships, like to his credit. he should have. I think he should be up there in Prost Vettel territory, easy.
Yeah,
you know,
I agree with you.
If things had worked out different, so.
Yeah, I agree with you for sure. Daily.
That was a great question.
Yeah, it was good. Both those questions were quite excellent. So thanks very much, everyone, for sending those in. Really appreciate that. Let everybody know what you got going on, Daily, and where they can find you.
So you can find me on Twitter at Mark Dailey F1, and that's Daily Dailey, and you can find us. We're the Scuderia F1 podcast, also on Twitter, X, and stumbling all over the place. Whatever it is, thanks, Elon.
Formerly known as Twitter.
Formerly known as Twitter, and we're the Scuderia F1 Pod there, and you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, everywhere you find Tim, we're there too, and we usually drop a show on Sunday nights after races and one during the week on usually Thursday nights or Friday morning.
Daily, this has been a lot of fun. Thanks again, man, for taking the time.
Thank
really
you.
Appreciate it. If you want more Nailing the Apex, you can get it wherever you get your podcasts. Please head over to Spotify, give us a 5-star rating and a follow. Same goes with Apple Podcasts. Please write a review as it helps us grow the pod. You can also watch us on YouTube at the same time. Follow me at Tim Hauraney on all forms of social media. We'll be back later this week. We're going to talk a little IndyCar. We've got special guests. We're going to talk about some engines for all of you hardcore engine fans, Formula One engines in particular. Got a pretty special guest coming on. So keep tuned in for that, and we'll talk to you all later.